Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar about California Humanities grant programs and upcoming funding opportunities. We'll be focusing on all of our grant programs, but also in specific, some of the upcoming deadlines this fall and winter of 2022. So the agenda for today is going to consist of an introduction to California Humanities, who we are and what our mission is. And then me and my colleagues will dive into some of the grant programs we have on deck right now, including relief grants, Humanities for All, California Documentary Project, and also Library Innovation Lab. We'll wrap up with some tips on your application process from our grants manager and colleagues, and then we'll have time for some question and answer breaks. In this Zoom, you can submit questions to us by using the control panel. Please type into the Q&A any questions you have for us. We'll take breaks throughout. We'll also be putting some links in the chat to guidelines and more information about these programs, and keep your eye there. We are recording this program, and if you have to leave early, we'll send you a video recording via email in the coming days. Great, so now we can move into a little bit about California Humanities. If you're new to us, we're an independent nonprofit organization that is a partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Since 1975, we have been promoting the humanities as a way to understand the human condition and connect us together through projects and programs and cultural experiences. And over the last 40 years, California Humanities has awarded over 30 million in grants across every congressional district in the state of California. You can read more about our work on calhum.org. Now I'd like to introduce some of my colleagues who are on the line. We have Brett Connor, Grants Manager, Lucena Lauvalle, Program Officer in Los Angeles, John Lightfoot, my colleague in the Oakland office, our Senior Program Officer, and myself, Kirsten Vega, Program Associate. And now we'd like to take a few minutes to talk about the term public humanities. So I'll hand it off to Lucena.
Sounds good, and I'm gonna go off screen for this, so thanks, Kirsten. So as we jump into our webinar today, we wanted to start off with a question that comes up a whole lot, and that's the question of what are the public humanities. And we define this idea pretty broadly, but I think there's some key components that we want to make sure everyone feels like they have a good understanding of. And for starters, the public humanities are humanity-centered learning experiences that take place outside of formal educational environments for audiences of every level. But more so, I think what we are hoping to really kind of underscore today is that these programs touch every aspects of social life. They are open to people with vastly, very diverse different experiences. And most importantly, that these are projects that have the fewest barriers possible. So in the past, some of the previously funded projects have included physical exhibits, so in-person exhibits, films, radio productions, websites and other digital media platforms, performances, public art installations, interpretive exhibitions and tours, whether it's a walking tour or some sort of exhibition tour. But at the same time, again, that these are accessible to general audiences and that they involve an exploration of the human condition through the humanities. So again, lectures, dialogues, panel discussions, etc. And you can find a very exhaustive list of our projects, previously funded projects and current projects on our website. And here's an example of some of the work we do that is beyond grant making. And so I guess I can start off with literature and medicine, which is the quadrant on the far top left side. And this is actually a project, or a program rather, that provides humanities. It is a humanities focused professional development program that is presented within hospitals. And right now we have about 6 program sites that are active. across California, primarily in the Veterans Affairs medical centers, but we're starting to expand to public hospitals as well. And so I'm going to pass it along to my colleagues to talk more about some of the other programs that we have active.
Shall I jump in? Okay, so I'm going to talk about Democracy and the Informed Citizen, and this is John Lightfoot, Senior Program Officer. This is a relatively new initiative designed to engage a broad cross-section of young Californians in consideration of the connections between democracy and journalism. And we're partnering and presenting this with community colleges throughout the state. The initiative incorporates several interconnected components, the first being Democracy Informed Citizen Emerging Journalist Fellowships, and these are for community college student journalists. And this includes financial support, access and mentoring from professional journalists, and the opportunity to conduct in-depth, long-form reporting projects of local and regional interest, so of things that are of interest to them and their communities. It also involves free public forums for campus and community audiences, discussing questions of journalism and democracy, and then also a campaign to elevate students' voices and perspectives in public discourse. We just wrapped up sort of the beta test run of the fellowships this past spring in partnership with 8 community college campuses, and now we're ramping up again to implement the fellowships and other activities this fall. Back to you, Kirsten.
Great. So I can jump in and talk about California on the Ballot, which is a new online discussion series that was launched in October of 2020 to convene conversations about the past, present, and future of electoral engagement in the state of California. We host free public online discussions featuring humanities and civics experts on topics like the aftermath of the Red Power movement, women's suffrage in California, and equity at the polls. We're going to be hosting a program on October 14th about the recall election 1 month in the rearview mirror, so stay tuned for more on that. The other program that we're working on these days is a series of capacity building workshops. This is really a response to some of the challenges that humanities organizations are facing coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we'll have a series of free online webinars addressing just some common challenges like virtual programming and mixed programming and being working in publicity spaces on the web and some other topics like that. So stay tuned.
And so some of our other funding opportunities that we'll be exploring today, I think we'll also be describing with our colleagues here, but I can get us started with Humanities for All grants, which we'll be delving into shortly. Kirsten and Brett and John, would you like to jump in and talk about some of these other programs briefly?
Thanks, Luciana. I can just add that Library Innovation Lab is a 1-year professional development program and humanities program incubator for public libraries in the state of California that want to create more welcoming experiences for immigrants in their community. Over to you, John.
Okay, sure. The California Documentary Project, just briefly, we'll talk about this more in a minute, is a grant program to support documentary media projects of and about California.
And the Relief Grant is a our U.S. government's direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 has directed funds across the whole nation through the NEH and down to us, as well as the other state humanities councils. These grants will be given for general operating support. And we've had 2 rounds already this summer. And if you have not already received a relief or recovery grant, you can apply to those as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next, in a couple more slides, but those applications are due in about 3 weeks.
And I guess, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that the Humanities for All suite of grants are designed for 1- and 2-year public humanities programming. So if I didn't mention it, we'll be talking about it extensively. And there are some deadlines just around the corner for the Quick Grant program in particular.
So next up, I'm going to talk about technical eligibility requirements. So the first thing to note is that we only accept applications from eligible institutions or organizations, not individuals. All right. Those applications can come from nonprofit organizations or local or state government entities such as public universities, libraries, museums, tribal governments even. Then they must meet the following criteria. You must have a tax-exempt organizational status at the state or federal level. So you need to have a federal tax ID or a California state ID that deems you as tax-exempt. Or if you are a smaller organization that isn't recognized in that fashion, or you are an individual that wants to conduct a project, you'd need to do so through a fiscal sponsor that does have that necessary status. Universities and colleges or their related foundations are automatically eligible to submit multiple applications since those institutions often are geared to funding and managing these types of projects. Those projects at the university level must not overlap with each other and must be directed by different individuals. Also, different departments would need to run those projects. So for instance, if CSU Fresno was to submit several applications for a couple different projects, that's fine, as long as maybe one application is from the Department of English, another one maybe is from the Department of History, so on and so forth. So the last two bullet points here, applicants should not have an active grant or a pending application with California Humanities. There's a couple of exceptions. I don't want to get too deep down this rabbit hole, but if you are a pre-approved multi-project fiscal sponsor or a college or a university, you can apply, you can submit multiple applications. And the other exception to this having an active grant is for the relief application that I just briefly spoke about. Let's say you have currently an active CDP grant or a Humanities for All grant. You are eligible to apply for a relief grant right now in the next 3 weeks for that general operating support. Finally, applicant organizations and project directors must be in good standing. That means if you've had a grant in the past, that grant has been completed, all the reports were submitted, and everything was done satisfactorily. I think next we'll move on to John with some key terms that we'll use throughout this presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. So we tend to have terminology that may or may not be universally comprehended and understood, and we want to make sure that we get that out to you all and sort of socialize that information at this point, because the bulk of the questions we tend to get are about these items you see listed on your screen. So I'm just going to give brief definitions, and colleagues, please chime in if you have things to add. First, you will hear that many of our grants, not all, but many of them require matching funds, at least a 1-to-1 match, meaning if you receive a $20,000 grant from California Humanities, you have to expend at least that amount on the project during the grant period, and that can either be in cash or in-kind donations. And there are a lot of nuances to that, but we'll leave it there for now. But I'll mention the primary reason we do that is because we need to match the funds we receive from the National Endowment for the Humanities and leverage that in partnership with you all as grantees. Next, again, a number of our grant programs require humanities advisors to be fully involved in participating in those projects. And these are people who can provide context, scholarship, perspective, and they're meant to be beneficial resources to the project. In most cases, they really are. And they're good allies for you down the road when the project is completed and you want to attract audiences or bring people to it. Humanities advisors, we have 3 basic categories for them. And again, there's a lot of subtlety and nuance here, but generally speaking, they can be scholars, affiliated with a college or university, primarily in the humanities disciplines. They can be independent scholars or curators or journalists or people who have written and researched about a subject so that they've got a perspective that'll be beneficial to you and in the implementation of your project. Or the third and very important category are culture bearers, meaning they're people who, through their lived experience, have a perspective to apply to the project that one couldn't generally gain through a formal course of study. And these can be community members, they can be elders. There are lots of people, yeah, you can imagine there'd be lots of people that would be beneficial to your project in that regard. Let's see, fiscal sponsors. As Brett mentioned, we don't make grants directly to individuals. So individuals need to work through a fiscal sponsor. And this is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that has the capacity and frankly, the infrastructure to fiscally sponsor the project, which means they're assuming the financial responsibility and administration for the project. For those of you who are unfamiliar with fiscal sponsorship, there's a lot of information online to refer to before sort of entering into that agreement. And we encourage you to do your research and choose wisely, because not all fiscal sponsorship programs are the same. We encourage you to get that relationship in writing and make sure you understand what you're sort of getting yourself into. There are many options out there, and there's also a lot of information out there for you. Oh, one other point about fiscal sponsorship is if you're planning on having that and applying to us with fiscal sponsorship, it's a good thing to get on that right away because it takes some time to arrange. The next term is project director. And for our purposes, this is the person who is not only the primary administrative contact for the grant, and even the application, it's also the person in most cases who has the primary responsibility for the implementation and completion of the program or the project. And I recognize that in some instances that may not be possible, particularly coming from an academic setting, whatever it might be. But again, that's the person who is the primary responsibility for conducting the project. And then finally, to differentiate the project director from authorizing official. The authorizing official is the individual at the applicant organization or the fiscal sponsor who has the legal authority to enter into what is in effect a contract with us by signing the grant agreement and assuming the responsibility of administering the grant on the project director's behalf or in partnership with the project director. And one of the things we find is that that three-way communication can be a little bit confusing between us and the authorizing official and project director. But authorizing officials have to sign off on any official document that is submitted to us, whether it's the application or the grant agreement. Anything to add, Brett or others?
No.
Actually, just one last point, which is that we spend a lot of time and care to make sure our FAQs and guidelines have as much clear and useful information as possible. We're just sort of scratching for the tip of the iceberg. We definitely encourage you to look at those for more in-depth information on all these issues, all these subjects.
So next I'm going to talk about and show you where you can get information on all of our current funding opportunities. So this is a snapshot of our web page, and the red tab that you kind of see highlighted in the middle is our funding opportunities page. The shortcut to that red tab is that green link that you see at the top of that image there. So that tab will show you the program, a list of program, the times of the year that it goes live, and you can click on those different programs to get more information on all of those. California Humanities generally grants an average of $1 million to nonprofit organizations, state and local government agencies, educational institutions, fiscally sponsored media makers, and other cultural organizations all over the state. So we are going to, as we've already begun, we're going to talk about our relief grants, our CDP programs, our documentary projects, our Humanities for All programs, and our Library Innovation Lab. And I think we're getting into next talking about each one of those individually. I'm going to continue on talking specifically about relief grants. As I started to talk about earlier, the primary purpose of the relief grant program is to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from COVID-19. The relief grant program will direct funds for short-term general operating support that will enable applicants to meet the immediate needs of their communities and respond to the current challenges that we're all facing due to this pandemic. Applicants can request between $5,000 and $20,000 in general operating. Grants will also be determined in proportion to your organization's budget. So your grant request can be no more than 10% of your last fiscal year's operating budget. Matching funds are not required in this grant line. And one of the most important things that I would tip organizations to include in your applications for a relief grant is that the organization must demonstrate a substantial track record of public humanities work within the past 5 years. Again, our application for this is due in about 3 weeks on Wednesday, September 15th. And just like all of our grant program applications, our applications are always due at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So that's a little bit about relief grants. And next, we're going to dive into our Humanities for All programs.
Thanks, Brett. And as you've been hearing from my colleagues, our grants fund a range of different types of engagement with the humanities, but all of these programs share a very substantial and direct exploration of the humanities for people of all walks of life. I'll just say a few things about the Humanities for All grant programs. This is a relatively new grant program. It was started, I believe, in 2017. And as we'll see, there are two ways to access funding. But really, there are some kind of key elements that differentiate the Humanities for All grants from some of the other grants that we offer. And for starters, again, this is a program that supports public-facing projects that engage people of all parts of California, and again, all walks of life through humanities-centered learning experiences. So there are three sort of threads that we have found make for very, very strong public humanities programming models. The first, and I think most important, is that these are participatory. So these are programs, as we said, that can be presented either in person when it's safe or virtually, but these programs do offer community conversations, forums, dialogues, opportunities for members of the public to exchange ideas, delve into a topic, and also both access knowledge and produce knowledge. I think that's a big part of it. So just to kind of read some of these bullets here to pull out some of the things that we hope that stay with you. The participatory projects also are very clear in their involvement of the public in humanities research, knowledge production, and again, dissemination activities. Secondly, these projects can be interpretive, which means that there are opportunities for exhibitions, whether permanent or traveling, digital or physical, with accompanying public programming. I think that's, again, a very important component of, again, the HFA Humanities for All programs. And the third, of course, is that there's opportunity for projects that involve lecture, presentation, performances with related discursive and or interpretive programming elements. And again, this is that space where the humanities will come in and offer, some sort of contextual framing, an interpretive dialogue, again, an aspect that is very explicitly drawing on the humanities. And last but not least, of course, narrative. So this can be projects that involve books, film, cultural programming with significant humanities programming elements, and then, of course, oral histories, story collection, and story sharing programs, and other narrative-based activities. To talk a little bit more in the next slide about the two Humanities for All grant programs that you'll find on our website. There are quick grants, which is on the left-hand side of the screen. And these are one-year projects, one-year project duration grants. The awards range between $1,000 to $5,000 in funding. There is no matching required. So I know John just mentioned a little bit about matching funds. Well, this is actually a grant program that does not require matching funds. These grants are offered 3 times per year, and there is about a 2-month review period for the applications to be reviewed and selected. So the next deadline is just around the corner. It is on Monday, October 18th, 2021. And just a heads up, in mid-September, we will release the grant guidelines and all of the other relevant application materials. And I believe it's, I won't give you the exact date, but I believe it's around the 20th or so of September, we will have a webinar that will be an applicant webinar that we'll be promoting on our website. So if you're signed up for our e-news, then you'll hear about it. Secondly, there are project grants, which is on the right-hand side of the screen. These are longer grant period. This is 2 years for the project duration, and the awards range between $10,000 to $20,000 in funding. This grant does require a 1-to-1 matching requirement. So there are matching funds required for this grant. There are 2 rounds per year in spring and summer. There is a 4-month review process. And so the next deadline is February 2nd, 2022. And I can share a few projects that have been recently funded. And this is a really fantastic exhibition that was organized and curated by Dr. Bridget R. Cooks at UC Irvine. And this is a project called the Black Index. This is an exhibition that happened both virtually and had in-person components. This exhibition presents visual strategies that contested the overwhelming number of photographs of Black people as victims of violent crimes that are circulated with regularity. And so instead, the photographs and the works presented in this exhibition contest images of Black death. So the next project that we have, which was funded by a quick grant, is part of a larger project that's called Cruising Nikkei, Japanese American Car Culture in Southern California, that was organized in conjunction between the Japanese American Museum, National Museum, and an organization called You Offend Me, You Offend My Family Foundation here in Los Angeles. And this is an exhibition and discussion series that explores the emergence of car culture in the greater Los Angeles area among second generation and first generation Japanese American immigrants.
Hey, Luciana, it looks like we have a couple questions in the chat about quick grants. One is from someone asking about arts organizations and in what situations arts projects and organizations can apply for public humanities funds.
Thank you, Kirsten. And that's a great question. So if you had an opportunity to take a look at some of our previously funded projects, we do, and we have funded projects that are what we would consider like a fusion of arts and humanities. And I will mention that we have a special focus area in the Quick Grant program dedicated for those kind of hybrid projects. What I will say about eligibility and really the alignment of those two types of disciplines is that the relationship between the humanities and whatever visual, performing arts, whatever sort of arts-based component of the project is that the humanities are explicitly described and conceptually are central to whatever the implementation of that project is. So off the top of my head, I can say that, we've had some pretty amazing projects like, for example, gosh, I'm forgetting the title, but there was an exhibition that we had recently of the work of a Native American artist at Chico State. And there were public programs that complemented the exhibit, that drew on research, that drew on history, that drew on archival materials. And it was, again, a very explicit component of that program. It wasn't something that was, you know, sort of tangential to the project. If you ever have any questions, you know, please contact me. I'm happy to talk about it. But I also recommend, if you have the time, to take a look at some of our previously funded projects, because we do denote the projects that are arts and humanities, so you can kind of, you know, see how some folks have navigated that kind of fusion of methods and also of disciplines.
Awesome, thanks, Susanna. Another question here: what can you have multiple humanities advisors, and is it possible to have project co-directors?
Oh, wow. So that's a great question. So I will say this, that for the purposes of the Quick Grant program, we require a project director. We don't have the formal requirement that the project grants require, and also I believe CDP, to have someone who is designated as a humanities advisor. So for many of our Quick Grant recipients, the project director sort of often serves the role of that humanities advisor. They're the person who is overseeing the implementation of the project. They have, you know, they have subject knowledge into the content of what that project will explore. But in some cases, we have seen other folks with expertise and experience, you know, and knowledge of a particular subject matter brought in. But I'll say for Quick Grants in particular, the project director is also the person who is reporting back to us how the project has performed. And so in many cases, sometimes it's best to have one person do that, because they're, you know, when you go through all the different steps for the final report, it's important to have some consistency, you know, in terms of who's filling out the different forms and so forth. But again, you know, if you have, I know that projects are very specific and have, you know, their own circumstances. Again, if you would like to talk to me offline, I'm happy to go into it.
So one more question, I think, for relief grants, Brett. What would constitute humanities focused work for the California Relief Program?
Yeah, so kind of all the examples that you've been hearing, you know, that you've been hearing so far, we want to hear from organizations who are producing humanities content for the public, whether that is, I mean, it could be so many things. It could be exhibits, it could be storytelling, it could be poetry, it could be writing workshops. You know, I think we've already talked about some of those examples that we qualify as humanities. A humanities modality of learning is something we often say. But I don't know, others, would you jump in and if there's anything else you'd like to add?
I think that covers it nicely. Why don't we keep moving? I see a lot of great questions in the chat. I'm going to keep doing some written answers, and we'll take another break after we hear about California Documentary Project.
Okay, so this is me, John. All right, yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about this grant program, longstanding grant program, California Documentary Project. And before I do, I just want to set sort of an overview and say, like, California Humanities has been supporting media pretty much since the organization was founded. And that was a very practical decision in that as a relatively small organization serving a state the size of California, tapping into those media networks that are out there was a really efficient and effective way to get humanities content to help spread that far and wide and reach multiple audiences and a broad range of audiences. Despite that almost 45-year history of supporting media projects, it's really important to emphasize that we're not a media organization per se. We are, as you've heard, a public humanities organization. So our emphasis and our primary concern is on the content, the story you're telling, how you're contextualizing it, how you're informing yourself to tell this story, in addition to, of course, creatively made, wonderfully made beautiful media productions. But first and foremost, we focus on how you're thinking about the subject. So next slide, please. So CDP is, just generally speaking, is a grant program that really seeks to document California in all its complexity. So it's a focus on California subjects and issues. And we support projects that use the humanities to provide context, depth, and perspective. And then that also strive to reach and engage really broad and diverse audiences. And this can be through multiple means, whether it's, you know, through a streaming service or whether it's through grassroots community-based screenings. We really like to see projects do all of the above. And by and large, that's a very important sort of review point for us, is that, is this project trying to reach both the audiences that it knows it can reach because they either have some vested interest in the subject, or they're people who go to film festivals or listen to public radio, or whatever it might be, but also can it reach beyond to audiences that don't have access typically to those sort of events and resources. In terms of style, you know, as it says here, the film, audio, or modality film, audio, and digital media projects are all welcome to apply. We're open to a whole range of lengths and formats and deliveries and things like that. So shorts, podcasts, web series, you know, feature length, broadcast length, virtual reality, whatever it might be, all welcome to apply. It's really, the question we ask is this the right project, or is this the right sort of modality for the right subject and right audience? Next slide, please. Okay, so we have 3 different categories for the California Documentary Project. The first being the research and development grants. And, you know, we intentionally design our funding to be early funding on most projects. And you'll see as we go along, our funds can be used for post-production, but to apply to us, the project has to be in the research and development stage or the production stage. R&D grants offer up to $10,000. It does require those matching funds we talked about, and 2 humanities advisors, deadline November 1st. And production grants offer up to $50,000, again with a match required, and requires, again, 2 humanities advisors and the same deadline of November 1st. To the point, briefly, to my point about us intending and hoping to support sort of the earlier stages of your project, is that these grant funds are intended to move the project forward, whether it's in terms of the development or the production. And as such, we place a lot of emphasis on the written proposal, because not every project is going to have the same level of media already produced. So to make it as level playing field as possible, we, as I say, place the bulk of our review emphasis on what's in the written narrative. So it's something to really think about how you're communicating, and it's a very clear and direct application process in terms of our guidelines, where you should just respond to each of those questions. The third category we introduced 3 years ago, and it's called CDP Next Gen. And this was with the recognition that we have a really long track record of supporting these really fantastic, high quality productions to get out in the world, but we could maybe try and intervene earlier when people are just getting started in their production career. So this is a grant that's to support, and frankly, encourage media makers under the age of 18 throughout the state of California. So this is a youth media grant, and these are $15,000 grants with a 1-to-1 match required. And the deadline for this will be, I believe, March 1st, 2022. And this is generally for organizations that have a pre-existing youth media program and who want to produce documentary or nonfiction short films or podcasts. And I'll just highlight a couple projects that I think are good examples of projects we've supported over the years, but also illuminate something of the nuance for the grant program. So the Asian American series was a 5-part public broadcasting series, executive produced by Renee Tajima-Pena and the Center for Asian American Media. And this is a project we support at the R&D stage and production stage. And a common question we get is, how Californian does a project have to be? Does it have to take place entirely within the state of California, for example? And it doesn't. This is a really good example of a project that has really deep California connections and ties, but ultimately is a national a national story. And so it's great to be part of the larger national story and to be able to get that California component into it. Other projects will be much more sort of regional and California based, but again, I want a good example to demonstrate sort of the expansiveness and the potential of that for CDP. The next I want to highlight two audio projects that are fairly recent. The first being What Fire Reveals, stories from the CZU August Lightning Complex fires. And this is a new podcast project from the Kitchen Sisters, timed to coincide with the 1-year anniversary of the Santa Cruz Mountains wildfires. And it's talking with residents, many who lost homes, about that experience and to also reflect on objects that survived the fire. An excerpt of this premiered on NPR's Morning Edition last week, and a 40-minute podcast was recently released as well. And there's also an associated exhibition of the photographers who documented these artifacts at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History. California Foodways is a really ambitious audio and podcast and radio project from producer Lisa Morehouse that seeks to tell stories about food and culture from all the 58 counties in the state of California. While reviewing this project, that scope and the geographic reach was actually really appealing because it gave us access or a presence and surface stories from parts of California where we don't always reach. This is an ongoing long-term project, as you can imagine, and just really fantastic kind of unexpected storytelling from different regions in California. And finally, as a really great example of one of the next gen grants we've made over the past few years, I wanted to highlight a film called Displaced by Youth Beat in Oakland. They work with the Oakland Unified School System to teach media literacy and production skills. And this was a collaborative project looking at the history and causes of displacement and gentrification in Oakland, told by the young people who are experiencing it. And it's just a great project, but it's also really thorough in terms of our mandate that it have a humanities component in that they research, say, the history of redlining, or they consulted with the Oakland history librarian to think about, how history plays into Oakland today. And so that's our intervention, so to speak, is how do you take a media project, add a humanities component so that people are thinking critically and analytically about the subject matter.
So it looks like we have a few more questions in the chat. John, I wonder if you could say a little bit about the difference between applying for R&D versus production, and at what stage you like to see kind of those applications.
So the primary difference between R&D and production, obviously is the state or the stage your project is in, but the real deciding line is if you have a work in progress to share. So you've created some media, doesn't have to be perfectly refined piece, but it's something that demonstrates and basically illustrates what you've written about in your proposal to the degree where you feel like it represents the project the way you want it to be represented. As to my comment of us trying to have it be as level a playing field as possible, a project that has already maybe raised and spent a ton of money to have a really, really fantastic work in progress is not necessarily going to be better off than a project is just starting out and hasn't raised those funds yet, because the emphasis is on how you're articulating and describing the project on paper. And I should say one other point. R&D is you need to know something of the story you're going to tell. It's got to be more than a concept.
Great. Question here, do we need to have a nonprofit status to apply for CDP? And if I'm using a fiscal sponsor, does it have to be based in California?
Question. So yes, as we said earlier, all applications have to be from nonprofit organizations. For CDP, that organization does not need to be in California. For the other grant programs that require fiscal sponsorship, they do. So this, again, we're recognizing that this program is California content driven as opposed to requiring California residency. So we understand there are applicants from all over the country who might be applying. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question.
Another question, can you apply for R&D and production at the same time for the same project?
No, you have to choose one. And a common question is people ask me to advise them which one to apply to, and I avoid being that prescriptive and just say I really think it's down to that. Do you have that media that you think adequately demonstrates the project, so it'll be competitive in a review process.
Thanks, John. I have a question for Brett here, and maybe other colleagues can jump in too. The question is, do you fund newer nonprofits with 2 to 3 months of organizational history, or do you look for more established organizations?
Yeah, you can be brand new as long as, you know, as long as I am able to verify your tax exempt nonprofit status, either at the federal level or at the state level, at the time you submit that application, or actually at the date that the application deadline. As long as I can verify that, you're good. We don't necessarily look for how long you've been in business or whatnot. Your experience with humanities programming will still weigh in, you know, in the application review process.
Great. We've had a few questions now about matching funds. So I just want to clarify that I believe for all grants, you do not need to have your matching funds in place at the time of application, just by the time of your final report. And your match can be made through a variety of ways, including cash, but also in-kind donations of time, space, expertise, venues. We go into this in great detail in our FAQ, so I recommend you check it out. Okay, let's keep moving. So next we want to talk about our Library Innovation Lab, and I'm going to take myself off camera. Great. So Library Innovation Lab is a program we launched in 2017, now in its 5th year, and it has worked with over 50 libraries across the state of California. The idea is that the Library Innovation Lab program provides a learn by doing professional development experience for a cohort of programming librarians or library staff who are not yet full librarians. And it's a supportive peer-to-peer environment where the cohort of about 10, including also 2 mentors, get to research, plan, implement, and assess new public humanities programs that target and welcome immigrant populations in their community. The participants develop skills, confidence, and connections in their communities, and they also get closer to colleagues across the state. What we provide, in addition to the structure of the professional development program and mentorship, is also $5,000 grant in risk capital for kind of experimenting with innovative programming. Library Innovation Lab programs can take a lot of different forms. We've seen projects over the past years that look like oral history projects that use writing workshops, publications, videos, audio, performances, traditional demonstrations of traditions, discussions, coffee hours in public libraries up and down the state. They can be hands-on. Some libraries use virtual reality tools or other immersive activities that help sort of travel and examine the immigrant experience. These programs can tend to be collaborative within the community, bringing in artists, musicians, culture bearers, authors, just community members, and also scholars and archivists. We do have another opening coming up for Library Innovation Lab. The next deadline here will be March of 2022. So if you or your colleagues are librarians or from a library foundation, please reach out to me and my colleague Felicia Kelly. We'd be glad to talk to you about applying for Library Innovation Lab. We'll be opening the application, I believe, January 1st, and we're more than happy to talk with you leading up to then about your eligibility. We also have a great list of previously funded projects on our website. I'll drop the link in the chat so you can see what some of the outputs have been over the years. Great, and now we have another quick question break here. Let's see, I'm just scanning. Luciana, I think this is a question for Humanities for All. Can a university provide reassigned time for faculty as part of matching grants?
As part of the matching reassigned? I believe so. But what I would recommend is contacting Felicia Kelly, because matching funds are not a requirement of the Quick Grant program. I don't see it very often, but I'm wondering if, John, do you ever encounter, like, is it release time or something like that that would lighten a professor's load so that they can implement the program?
I recall that, but I don't want to say definitively. I think Felicia would be better positioned for that.
Yeah. I feel like I've seen it recently in the past and the question has come up, but what I would recommend doing, because it is the matching funds are a central requirement of the project grant program, that Felicia Kelly, who manages that program, would be able to give you a really good definitive answer.
Great. And I'm seeing some questions here that talk about specific situations, or maybe some folks who are wondering which program would be a good fit for their project. In that case, please do feel free to email us. We'll put the staff emails in the chat, and we'd be happy to talk you through, program by program, what would be a really good fit.
Kristen, let's get this question from June. I think that's a good one.
Great. Okay, June is asking, do all photos and stories become the property of California Humanities? Can the presenter keep ownership or, for instance, print a book for resale of the same content? Brett, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so, what we write in our grant agreement along these lines is that, the grantee understands and is applying for these grants for the purpose of educating members of the public to get this humanities content out into the world, to share this area of public concern. So the copy, the stuff is yours, you know what I mean? But what we write is that California Humanities and the grantee agree to engage in a relationship of good faith and cooperation to ensure that your produced materials are reasonably available to us. Because we might want to share your content with others, or maybe point other members of the public to your project, put you in contact with you directly, or share your materials in that way. We also like to use your materials for advocacy purposes, to continue to talk to our state and leaders and the congressional folks about continuing to get to support California Humanities with federal and/or state funding.
John, do you want to add anything in terms of CDP films?
I'll maybe echo a little bit. Yeah, to echo Brett's point, you retain copyright. We have, we're not taking the copyright. We do require a copy of the final production for our archives, but we are not a distributor, and so we're not going to put that online or anything like that. We do like to program with your collaboration as a grantee, but that's something we negotiate on a case-by-case basis.
Great, thanks. Well, let's keep moving for now. I think we've got one more section, and then we'll do another Q&A at the end.
And I can jump in at this point. So you've heard all about our different grant programs and the different components that are required. But I think this is the big question that comes up a lot, and that is, what makes your project or proposal stand out? And to put this into context, we receive many grant applications for all of our grant opportunities throughout the year. And so there are some elements that help projects rise to the top. First and foremost, our organization was created to support the proliferation of the public humanities. So for us, we are looking for projects that really show how the humanities are central to your project and not a tangential kind of added on element. So my hint that I always tell people is really show in explicit terms how your project is drawing on the humanities. Second, that the programs that you're designing, the projects you're designing, are audience-centered and publicly accessible. And in fact, in our application materials, we ask, how are you reducing barriers to access? So we understand that that comes in a variety of different forms. And so, again, that's what we're asking you to show and tell us about in your application. We are also looking for projects that are responsive to community interests, so that there's support from those communities that you're seeking to engage, and also that the project is relating to the issues and histories and topics that are germane to this audience. We're looking for projects that are ambitious but realistic. That feasibility is that is a huge component in how our grant reviewers are evaluating a project, that the person designing the project knows what it takes, whether it's in resources, whether it's in funding, et cetera, or scheduling or design, that really they have a very strong sense of, how to make this project happen in real time. And then last but not least, that your project, especially for CDP, I think this is really, unique to CDP, that your project has the potential to reach and engage both statewide and also national audiences. And if there's anything else anyone wants to add, if I missed anything.
That's perfect.
Okay, and I think we have a second page. Oops, looks like our screen has changed.
I think we might have lost Stephen.
Did we lose Stephen?
Who was presenting? So let's keep on moving. Let's keep on talking about what makes the project and proposal stand out.
And I can wrap it up. So we have a few other components, and that the budget is sound and reasonable. Again, as you'll see once you dig into the different grant applications, we do request a project budget. So this is where you will be showing and telling us about matching funds, if that is, a part of your project, or if that is part of the grant line you're applying for. But we also are looking for budgets that are clear about, rates of pay. We're looking for budgets that are clear about reasonable costs for venues, materials, etc. Second, we're looking for project teams that have the capacity, whether it's materials or equipment, but also the important experience and bodies of knowledge that are that make them well suited to carry on a project. And last but not least, and I think this is something that you probably have heard kind of bubble up in a lot of the things that we've said, that your proposal demonstrates a commitment to project partners, to community members, to people, whether in your local community or regional community or statewide community, who will be taking part and engaged with this program. And I think we're almost at the next day. So when we're talking about what happens next, so after you submit your proposal, there's going to be either 2 months of review, or in our other grant programs, a longer period of review. And during that time, a few things will be happening. So the review process includes a review of criteria. So that is where we look for the quality, the capacity that are outlined in the guidelines that are, again, unique to your project. We're also undertaking a multi-stage review that includes peers, folks who are humanities field practitioners, board members, and/or California Humanities staff members. The degree of competitiveness for each grant cycle, each grant line, varies by program, and is also significantly impacted by the volume of applications that we receive per round. Typically, we fund about 10 to 15%, sometimes a little bit more, depending on, again, all of those factors. After the review process has occurred, then it's the notification and award process. And the timeline, as we mentioned, varies by program. So with quick grants, it's roughly 2 months, and then you'll hear back. With project grants and also with CDP, that's a little bit of a longer timeline. The announcements are sent via email. So the the email address that was tied to your application in our grant portal, that's the email address that will receive the notification, telling you what the decision is. I will say, always check your spam folder. That's sometimes people will miss that message because it gets routed to spam. There's an option for obtaining reviewer comments. It takes a little bit of time to get the feedback, but we're always happy to give you either written feedback or a summary of oral feedback that is again summarized from our grant reviewers. Revised applications are welcomed, and I know someone had asked a question: if we are declined one round, can we come back and resubmit with a revised application? And that's absolutely fine, and we welcome that. We just want to ensure that you receive that official notification that you didn't get the grant, and then you can go ahead and move on and reapply for the next grant program. If you do choose to revise, I highly recommend obtaining those reviewer comments, because that will give you the feedback that can help strengthen your application. And then lastly, schedule for the disbursement. The disbursement of funds varies by program, but most importantly, and I think Brett can back me up on this, you need to have your award letter signed. So that's crucial to signed and approved, I should say, to accessing the grant funds.
Hey, Kirsten, I don't know if we were skipping ahead because of our time here, but if we missed the how to apply screen and the application tips. So I'm not sure if that was on purpose.
Oh, sorry, Brett, my mistake here. I'll share it from that slide now.
Okay, so our applications must be submitted via our grant portal, and you can find a link to our grant portal on our homepage, as well as the funding opportunities pages that we talked about. For all of our applications, there is a couple things that we always require: an application form, a proposal budget, a proposal narrative, a project budget and budget narrative, and certification. Depending on the grant line, other things might include media work samples, a timeline of activities, or a memo of understanding, or a fiscally sponsored contract between you and your fiscal sponsor. Do not wait until the last day to get your application. If you do, something is for sure going to go wrong. Please start early and ahead of time. Do not wait until the deadline day to submit your information. All materials must be submitted through the portal. Nothing will be accepted via email, postal mail, or fax. John, I think do you want to talk about application tips?
Sure, I can do that. So some of these are fairly obvious, but I think that's really important to just to be really clear about them. As I said earlier, we have done our best to be as clear and as concise and as direct in our guidelines and FAQs as possible. All the instructions are there. Please follow them. In terms of the writing, it's really important to just review, edit, and proof your narrative as much as you can. And I think it's a really good idea to recognize that you're writing for people who may not have the same level of expertise about your subject as you do. And so you really need to err on the side of sort of over-explaining. I've seen otherwise really solid projects fall by the wayside because there's just enough, reviewers are scratching their heads just enough going, I'm not sure exactly what that means. Simple problem to fix. Just make sure you're writing for a general audience, again, who may not have the same level of expertise. And then to Brett's point, just make sure you have everything in place, ready to submit well in advance of that deadline. We're here to help you. We're on call to help you on those deadline days. But it gets really difficult if we're getting tons and tons of calls at 4:45 on the deadline day. It's limits.
And we do every time.
And I think that last line, one sec, before you go away, that last line says about hitting submit. It's a common, semi-common, and Brett, you can elaborate on this, I think, but where people think they've submitted what they need to do, but they just actually didn't hit the submit button. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you'll find in our portal that there are different tasks within the application. And at the end of every single task, you will hit a button that says mark as complete. After all the tasks are marked as complete, the green submit button will light up and be available for you. If that submit button is still grayed out, you've not completed something. All right, what is required of grantees? First of all, we need a signed grant agreement. This is done through an electronic signature procedure and is very quick and painless. You will be notified that there is an orientation for your cohort of grantees where we make you familiar with the reporting requirements, what you should be doing with next steps, and we go over some more things within the grant portal. If you need to make any changes to your project, they have to be approved in advance. This is done through the portal called a change request form. Again, if you are granted, we will go through all of this in much more detail. We consider major changes to be modifications to the scope or the direction of the project, an extension of time past your original granted award period, any significant changes in key activities, maybe your program format, maybe the staffing on your project, the timeline, the budget, or maybe sometimes even your fiscal sponsor might need to change. Let's see what else. We need to make sure that California Humanities and the NEH are properly acknowledged in public programming and publicity, any media outreach, including press releases, and then any work products. And there is sample language for you to use in your grant agreement. And lastly, always keep us informed about your upcoming project activities and events so we can help your marketing efforts. Next, we monitor your progress, and we want you to monitor your own progress towards your project objectives, outcomes, and impacts. Depending on what grant line you have been awarded, there may or may not be an interim report that is required, and there's always a final report that is required. If you need matching contributions, make sure that you seek those out, solidify those matches, and make sure you're tracking every dollar to be submitted in your budget. I also already mentioned the final report. The final report, as John said, needs to have the final product along with it, whether it's a documentary, whether it's a book, whether it's a zine, whether it's an online exhibit. We ask for promotional materials. You might even send us any letters or correspondence that has to do with this grant. If you still have outstanding funds, depending on what your grant line is, they will be dispersed to you following the approval of your final report. All right, here's our last opportunity for questions. And thanks everyone for sticking along with us. I know we're running a little bit over, but that's just the nature of these sorts of webinars.
So Brett, I'm not able to see the question panel now that I'm sharing, if you don't mind.
Here. Does all matching funding have to pass through the fiscal sponsor?
I'll grab that no, particularly if it's an in-kind donation, that wouldn't affect them at all. I mean, I think it's a quite, well, short answer, no. It's kind of a complicated issue, but.
And Kirsten, I assume this recording will be posted on our website soon, or will it just be sent out in email to the people who participated?
Well, what we like to do is post it on our YouTube channel, which is public, and I will automatically email it out to everyone who registered today as well. So you won't be able to find it on our website, but that's something we should think about.
All right, Phyllis asks, how soon are funds dispersed? This totally has to do with the application line that you're that you are applying for. Something like a quick grant is the only one where that initial $1,000 to $5,000 would be dispersed immediately up front. Well, the same holds true for a relief grant. But most of our other programs like project grants and any of the documentary project grants, it's split up into percentages. So a certain percentage when you sign the grant agreement, another percentage when you submit your interim report, and the final percentage of the grant at the end of the final report. So this is all in the grant agreement if you are to receive a grant. But the bottom line is it varies by grant line.
But Brett, maybe one thing I just realized, with quick grants, for example, once that grant period begins and you sign your grant agreement and the grant agreement is accepted, at that point it can take a few weeks because there is some sort of back end with the online banking, or if you're getting a paper check, and then the funds are provided up front. But if there's an issue, for example, with your grant agreement, or there's some sort of issue that can cause a delay, then that will slow things down. But typically, once that grant period begins and you receive your notification, we're really timely. And my colleague like Brett, he's so timely about getting that process started with our other colleagues.
All right, so I think that kind of wraps it up. Some of the other questions that are in the boxes are pretty specific about this is the kind of project I want to do. What do I do with it? Or does this count as humanities activities? So for those types of things, I encourage you to pick one of these people on this slide. And we will help answer your questions. If there's anything else that we have left unanswered, feel free to reach out to any one of us. Here are all of our social media links and whatnot, our webpage, and our emails. So feel free to get in touch with us. Any other final thoughts from anybody?
Thanks so much for joining today, and we look forward to being in touch.
Can we point people towards the upcoming webinars for more info?
Yes, I think so. We have 2 upcoming webinars. California Documentary Project will have a webinar on September 15th. If you'd like to register for that, go to our website, to the California Documentary Project Funding Opportunities page. Likewise, Quick Grants has a webinar coming up on September 20th. So if you'd like to join us for that, please register online and we'll have some more information for you then. Okay. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.